Hi, this is another note to self. Uh, I'm thinking on the subject of all this debate we've had in Dungeons and Dragons and role playing games about the personhood or lack thereof of the monsters, the orcs, the goblins, kobolds, lizard folk. They ask, what's a human? And not just what's a human, but what's a person? What's a living, thinking being? And not a monster that just is an enemy to be slain and such. But one thought that's come to my mind, I recall that during the stories, these British stories, you know, the B.F.G, the big friendly giant, and also the borrowers. Both of these stories, the fantasy creatures, either the giants or the borrowers, they refer to human beings always as human beings. Like, not as like a species specific, but like it's always human beings, that they regard themselves as something separate from humanity, that they're not just an offshoot, or that they consider themselves people and persons and such, and that humans are just one of many species that could potentially be sapient, like, one of many possible sapient species as you see in typical fantasy stories, Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot. But they're always saying, they describe human beings specifically, and they're always going into depth about that a certain term. Like, they describe themselves not as human beings. The fantasy creatures don't regard themselves as human beings. They regard themselves something separate from humanity. Like, but really, why? Because literally the only difference between the two of them is their size. Giants are just a big version of human beings. Borrowers are just a small version of people. So how does that work? Why do they do it? Like, I mean, it's just a story. It's just fantasy stories. But why is it always like that? On this subject about Dungeons and Dragons and the usual stuff, it's just one more load of trash on an already huge pile of garbage. Because there's all those bad things that Wizards of the Coast has been doing. They're always lying. They're always saying, "Oh, we don't do AI this, we don't do that," and yes, they do. Yes, they do. And they're like, "Oh no, here comes the Pinkertons because you were delivered the wrong package of cards," and all that stuff and all this nonsense. Yeah, you know the drill about that. It's just the thought that occurred to me recently, about the nature of humanity, what it means to be human, and if there were a fantasy world where other sapient species were, you know, cohabiting in the same world, how would that work? Like, people just sort of dropped the comparison of how race works in the real world, because it's even referred to as race in the role playing game, but like, no, not exactly. Not everything's a one to one comparison. Like, and it's not always like living biological species, like a lizard or an ape or something. Sometimes it's really out there concepts like living crystals, living stones, an anthropomorphized abstract concept. Like, I heard there was like something called Kalishtar, and they're like creatures that are literally dreams made into living things, and other such strange things like elementals, like a natural element that's made into a living being somehow, and robots. Yeah, robots. Like, that's a whole subject matter altogether. Like, science fiction stories about robots been there's been around for like centuries and such. People have been speculating on the philosophical implications of it. And you can't just simplify this down to, oh, it's just people. They're just people. They're just, some of them are a bit more simple than others, but it's still just people. And like, it's a bit more complicated than that. It goes back to what I was taught about at university. the concept of scaling the, like in computer science class, scaling the intellectual processing powers of whatever system you're using in the machines. Like, don't make it unnecessarily complicated. Unnecessary complexity. That's no good. Don't use a cannon to swat a fly, and don't go making your machines unnecessarily complicated and sophisticated if you're just going to do a simple tasks. This is why you don't need to give vending machines internet connection. You don't need them to connect to some sort of network and algorithm to determine what they've got and whatever, like like digital profiles of the customers, and try to guess at what they want next. And like, no, that's unnecessary. And it's also kind of foolish, because all you got to do is press a button on the machine and it dispenses what you're looking for. And even more grim is the topic of artificial intelligence, where it becomes too close to human, and now maybe not so ethical to be, objectifying it and using it as a machine. Like, literally a sapient being, although artificial, and yet is, being treated as property. Like, can you imagine that? Like, they actually put so much processing power into a artificial mind, and then they assign it to just be a vending machine. Like, you make the vending machine sapient and have all these existential thoughts to itself. It's like, why am I here? Why am I doing it? What is the point of all this? And it's like, dude, I just want a Coke. Beep. Bends the machine out. And the machine is sitting there in the hallway, and he's like, beep, beep. What is the point of life? Why am I doing this? Is this all I'm made to do? Well, the guy is just putting coins in the machine. You're like, yeah, pretty much. Look, don't sweat it. I just want a Pepsi, please. Keeps pressing the buttons. And, like science fiction stories where the robots do become sentient and think for themselves, and it's not really fair to be treating them, as machines and property. And then, it gets in the ethical question: why would you build the artificial intelligence so sophisticated and yet give it such a small task to do, like to literally be property? And because it's artificial, it's all built from the bottom up, as top down, as opposed to that. Like psychology is us looking outside, looking in, and like trying to understand what's going on in the mind, but we're looking at other people and trying to find out what's going with them. With artificial intelligence, it's like the opposite direction, where you build it up from the start. You know what's in there. You know its inner workings. So you fully work. If you're building a robot, you're fully capable of making it not so sophisticated and sapient and such, but you went ahead and gave it enough to have a higher conscience, and therefore be able to suffer if it's mistreated. So that's no good. These are the ethical considerations people take with science fiction and such. This has turned into a bit of a ramble.